What's going on, everybody? Jackson Fuller here, and you are listening to the latest episode of Hoggin the Mic being recorded on Monday, April 22nd, here in the morning, coming off of a very, very good week for the Arkansas baseball team. It might not have felt like it was going to be a great week all times, but they finished things off with a series victory over South Carolina and a midweek sweep over Texas Tech before that. We'll bring in Hutch momentarily to discuss all of that, along with some additions and losses through the football transfer portal. And Calipari finally has his first commit. I'm sure there are plenty more to come. We will touch on all of that here on Hoggin the Mic. Let's play that rock music, bring Hutch in, and get this episode rolling. Hutch, how's it going, man? How different are we feeling about the Arkansas baseball team today than we were when it was 7-0 Texas Tech in the second or third inning on Tuesday night after coming off the series loss to Alabama? Looked like it was all things were falling apart there for a little while, but they righted the ship. How big was this week, do you think, for the Arkansas baseball team to steady things and get back to maybe the status quo a little bit?
Yeah, it was huge, and really the weekend series win over South Carolina on the road was the most important part of the week. I know beating Texas Tech in a couple of midweek games is nice, but honestly, when they were down 7-0, I actually texted a couple of my friends. I was like, "This feels like a game they're going to lose 14-1, and the fan base is going to absolutely panic, lose its mind." Because he did just lose the two games against Alabama, but lo and behold, they came back and won that. They won the next day, and then, as I just said, go to South Carolina. Uh, to win that second game of the doubleheader on Saturday told me a lot. Like, this team just kind of finds ways to get it done, and the offense was putrid the first two games. I mean, we can't sugarcoat it. It was just not good. I think they left, I want to say, 27 runners on base or something like that, something ridiculous in 18 innings. And they went, I think, 2 for 25 with runners in scoring position. Neither of those two hits scored a run. It was not pretty. And then they break out and they scored 9 runs in game three. That, to me, was just a massive, massive win for the baseball program. Not to say like it would have been season over if they had lost, but I think that just tells you, like, confirms, like, okay, this team is a bona fide top five, top two team in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy kind of looking back at the Friday night box score, 10 walks, and they only scored 2 runs is crazy. Um, I was impressed that they came back and won that game. I mean, Hagen Smith was trailing, I think, for the first time in, well, no, he's been behind before this season, but that really felt like a game, one of the first times this season where Hagen's pitching, where, oh, this feels like they could sneak out and lose this one, especially with South Carolina not electing to throw their ace on Friday night. But they rallied for 2 runs in that sixth inning. Of course, no real RBI hits. They kind of small balled and ground their way to a victory there. And then, like you said, the offense coming to life in game three. Um, Maybe I'll take a little bit of a pessimistic side to the offense coming alive. I think South Carolina ran out of pitching in a lot of ways. Their game three Sunday starter turned to be Saturday doubleheader finale starter was TBA coming into the weekend. Not having that extra day of rest, they couldn't throw guys maybe that they wanted to Friday on Sunday. And I think Arkansas's roster is built to succeed on doubleheaders just with the amount of pitching that they have and different guys. Other teams are going to want to bring their top line relievers back Friday to Sunday. Arkansas probably wants to do that, but they don't have to, which is such a luxury this year. Um, Even with all that said, I think the confidence with this group just has to be sky high, and I think the Texas Tech series plays a part in that. I think you're right. Like, yes, winning on the weekend is always more important, and going on the road and beating a top 25 team is super impressive. But with the way the offense performed over the first two games, I think having that Texas Tech experience in the midweek is a big factor into just maybe some positive vibes right now with what was supposed to be a huge week coming into the season. Florida coming to town just hasn't shaped up that way. It's kind of been a weird SEC slate where some of the bigger series have turned into not so big series, and everybody's got that Kentucky series on the road circled on the calendar right now.
Isn't that kind of weird? Although I am really excited to see, I think his name Jack Caglianone or something. I can't don't know how to pronounce his last name, but that dude can rake. He can also throw it. Pretty awesome to get to see him in person. But yeah, the winning those Texas Tech games were big. Especially winning them the way they did. Just for confidence and everything. And I will say, yes, South Carolina ran out of pitching, but that's the glory of this Arkansas team is they have enough depth where they can just kind of take a blow, and then hey, game 3, boom, we get you. That can be what they do in the postseason if they find themselves in an elimination game. Like you just gotta avoid losing 2 in a row, and with the pitching they have, I think that's going to be easier, an easier task than it maybe would be if in previous years where I remember last year in the regional, if they had beaten TCU to force the final game, the winner take all game, Dave Van Horn told us like after the game, he's like, I have no idea who I would have thrown. And so I mean it could have been crazy. We could have seen a position player or something pitching. I don't know. I don't think he's going to have that problem this year. They've got enough guys that they're going to be able to sustain if they find themselves in a loser's bracket because of that pitching.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's obviously one team's weakness right now is another team's strength, or at least in that South Carolina Arkansas series. And I think it's interesting what you point out there with this pitching staff. And I think it finally dawned on me this weekend is like we keep saying like, oh, this offense only has to be like a C. It doesn't have to, it has to be average and stuff. And I think it is average. I think the offense is going to be pretty average from here on out. And you're going to get a lot of 1-run games, a lot of 2-run close nail biter games, especially, on Friday nights when you're going up against the best of the other team's pitching staff. But right now, Arkansas is finding a way to win most of those games. They've had a couple slip ups in some close games, and usually the games they lose have been pretty close because that pitching staff's so good. It doesn't let the other team separate themselves. But we're going to get a lot of close games, and that's just by design this year because this team's built to pitch its way past opponents. And I think the offense can improve from what it's been the past couple of weeks, but I think the ceiling of this offense is not top tier of the SEC. I think if this Arkansas offense reaches its potential, it will be a middle of the road average SEC offense this year.
And I think that's okay, as you said, because of the pitching staff. But also, I feel like if they can just click on all cylinders, which again, easier said than done. But if they could just all do it at the same time, I mean, because everybody on this roster has had like a great moment. I mean, even heck, Parker Rowland is the guy who sparked the offense in Game 3. A guy that had 3 hits all year before hitting that double off the wall, just barely missing a home run. Which I believe if he had hit a home run, I think it would have been like the 14th or 15th different guy to hit a home run this year. So that kind of shows you the depth. Now, it's not like they've got a ton of great guys, of depth, but I mean, if they're all doing well, like hitting their potential at the same time, then they have the potential to be an above average offense. And if you have an above average offense with this pitching staff, you're borderline unbeatable. So it depends on if this lineup can get hot at the right time in the postseason as to whether or not they're going to be able to go the distance. I mean, this pitching staff could carry them to Omaha, no doubt. Especially if they keep winning like they are, they're going to get to play at Baum. They're really tough to beat at Baum. I think we all know that. They've won, I don't know what the streak's up to now, 24, 25 games in a row. So that's going to help. But whether or not they actually do what everyone wants them to do and win a national championship, I think it's going to take that lineup getting hot at the right time.
Yeah, I agree. They can't. I don't think if they're hitting like this right now, come June, I don't think they're winning a national championship. But if they're hitting like they were throughout most of the month of, the late March, early April stint, then absolutely they can win a national championship. Real quick, bring up bomb. What happens if Arkansas loses on Tuesday down in North Little Rock? Do we like how are we going to phrase this? You know, we got to call it the bomb walker
Well,
winning streak
so
then if it keeps on
I
going?
actually checked around. I asked Oliver, the SID. I asked a couple other reporters. I'm like, okay, what are we counting the Dickey Stevens Park game as a home game? Because like that also matters because like if they win that game, then all they have to do is win Friday's game to match the longest home winning streak in school history, and then they have to win Saturday's game to break it. Well, if we
See,
don't count Tuesday's game, then they have to sweep Florida, which is really tough. So I've asked about it, and everyone seems to be in agreement that it is a neutral site game. Now, if you've
ooh,
ever been to Dickey Stevens Park for an Arkansas game, it is not a neutral site. But that's what they're classifying it as for Arkansas's purposes. It's
okay,
it's weird because I mean, the games at War Memorial Stadium for the football team, those are home games. Now, for the RPI, which factors in home, road, neutral, kind of like the net rankings, I believe it is a home game. But don't hold me to that. I'm not 100% sure. I know for basketball, it is a home game. There's very weird rules with all that.
I imagine. I mean, I don't know. This is my first year here dealing with this. I imagine the fact that it's UAPB, right? They're playing UAPB on
Yeah,
Tuesday, and it might like if they're playing an out-of-state team, there's no way it could be considered
I think they
neutral
still would. I
site
think they
game. But
still would. I don't think it's the
really,
fact that it's UAPB. I think it's just that it's not in Fayetteville, so they're going to call it a neutral site game.
hmm.
It's a little bit, I guess it's in the eye of
Yeah,
the
but
beholder.
I guess it is truthfully not Baum Walker Stadium, so I guess it is not truly a home game. But um, all I wanted to say from my vantage point on baseball this weekend, I think we got some really encouraging performances from Peyton Holt and Kendall Diggs, and Coach Van Horn has been asking for the outfielders to start producing a little bit more. And those two guys, Peyton Holton, maybe not viewed as an outfielder, but he's playing out there right now. He's kind of continued his little hot streak here since re-entering the lineup. I think he had tied for the team high with 5 hits on the weekend. And then Kendall, a hit a hit in game 1 on Saturday. He had 2 hits on game 2 Sunday. I think he also had a pair of RBIs. Really, the slump in the offense has kind of coincided with his slump personally. So if I feel like it's really as simple as if him, Stovall, and Aloy are hitting well, and you add McLaughlin to that, who's kind of been hitting well all season, but those are kind of the 3 stars with like the power, the extra base, the high slugging percentage guys. If those 3 guys are hitting well, I think this Arkansas baseball team offense is good enough. They haven't been hitting that well recently, especially Aloy and Diggs, but good to see Diggs kind of show some life there at the end of the weekend.
Yeah, that was really good to see. And Aloy, which is crazy, you mentioned he didn't have the best weekend, but he still has his on base streak going. I think it's up to 30 games where he's reached base successfully. So that's impressive. And I guess one individual performance or a couple that I'll single out on the pitching side of things. Brady Tigert was phenomenal. To get 6 innings out
Mm-hmm.
of him in Game 3 was huge. Especially whenever you didn't get it nearly as much from Mason Molina. So that was really good to see. And then also I'll give one reliever a shout out, Parker Coyle. How about the lefty coming in and giving? I think he ended up his final stat line may not be that impressive because I think he left the game with I don't know 2 on or bases loaded or something, and all 3 of those guys or both those guys scored. So he was charged with some runs, but he made it through the couple innings scoreless. He worked out of he inherited a pretty big jam, took a line drive off the arm and was able to recover and get the out at first. Stay calm, accurate throw. Just a really nice outing from him. So that if he's able to keep that going and give Arkansas another lefty arm out of the bullpen, man, it's just another addition to the embarrassment of riches that is the Arkansas pitching staff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that kind of struck me coming out of this weekend is I think when we talk about the relievers, and of course Hagen Smith, another terrific performance. We have to mention him. 6 more innings, 11 more strikeouts. He was phenomenal and got up to 99 pitches. like you mentioned, Mason Molina, not as good this weekend. He would like a bounce back performance against Florida. But as far as the relievers go, I think Gabe Gackle might have supplanted Will McEntire as the go to arm out of the bullpen, and that can probably fluctuate as the year goes on. There's a chance Gabe is a freshman; he hits a freshman wall. I'm sure this is the most he's going to, even with just being a reliever, he's going to approach like a career high in innings and, all the work that comes with being a college pitcher. So McEntire could slide into that spot. But right now, if it's Friday night and the game's on the line, I don't know how DVH doesn't go to Gackle over any of the arms out of the bullpen.
Yeah, and I think they tried to use Christian Fouch there, and as kind of a bridge guy to get to Gackle, and didn't go well. Although Fouch has pitched pretty well of late, he just didn't have it. Gave up, I think, a 1-2 single, and then plunked a guy. I say plunked, I mean nailed him right in the head. Kind of a scary moment, but yeah, so that was disappointing. And
Yeah.
McEntire, for whatever reason, his last few outings have not been nearly as good as he was beforehand. I don't know if you hope it's not that teams are figuring him out. Hopefully, it's just a little rough stretch and he'll get going. To me, he's got enough body of work that I think he's gonna. Whenever it matters, it truly matters in the postseason. He's gonna be nails. I think he's still gonna be a guy. But I mean, it's kind of it might be like a different kind of depending on which situation it is. Like, I mean, if it's if you've got Mason Molina on the mound and he only gives you 3 innings, then you might turn to Will McEntire at that point because you think he can give you a little bit more length. But if it's, say, the 7th inning and Hagen Smith is worked into the 7th and he's put a couple of guys on and there's 1 out, I'm calling on Gabe Gackle. That dude, I think I think he's inherited 17 runners and only 1 of them has scored. I think that's the stat. That's really damn impressive. So, especially for a freshman. So that is, as you said, very, very encouraging. I like what I've seen from Gabe Gackle, and hopefully McEntire can get back on track.
Agreed. One other player to mention, it's not like Ross Lovich, he had 3 walks on Sunday's game, and then in Saturday or game 3, the second game of the doubleheader on Saturday, and then in game 2, he also had 2 hits. I mean, he didn't score a run, he didn't have any RBI, but getting on base 5 times, kind of fluky to not, be a part of the run production at all. I imagine that if he gets on base 5 times this weekend against Florida, he's gonna score at least once or twice. Man, it seems like that left field's your job, right? It just kind of rotates and who's hot, and it's up to DVH to press the right button. I know Peyton Holt is getting a lot of reps out there, but if Peyton Holt can be a serviceable center fielder, maybe we continue to see him and Wilmsmeyer rotate out there. And I kind of like that, honestly, because I think Wilmsmeyer is the superior defensive guy, but they really do need production from that outfield. It can't be, they can't have 3 empty holes out there when it comes to hitting. And if Peyton Holt's going to keep hitting like this, I think it's okay to sacrifice a little bit of defense to get his bat.
I agree. And honestly, Holt, I've been pleasantly surprised with how well he's held up there in the outfield. That isn't always the case. Last year, Kendall Diggs was an infielder turned outfielder, and the first few times he was out there, it was not pretty. But I haven't had that same kind of reaction with Peyton Holt. I mean, that's saying something. I think that's a credit to his athleticism and just baseball IQ, ability, and everything. So, I think it'd be a good idea to keep him, maybe as you said, in center, and late in the game, maybe you move him over to left and you bring in Wilmsmeyer as a defensive replacement, take out whoever it is you've got in left field. So, I think that is I think that's maybe the way to go. Especially if you need some offense.
Yeah, I agree. And then one more pitcher I think I want to mention, and he didn't pitch on the weekend though. Cooper Dossett against Texas Tech. 2 2/3 innings, no hits, no runs. He did have a walk. Only 2 strikeouts, which I feel like a lot of the relievers rack up multiple strikeouts when they come in. But man, it's just crazy that they've got this guy that is capable of throwing 2 2/3 scoreless against Texas Tech, and they don't even need him on the weekend. It just speaks to the depth of this pitching staff, like we've spoken to so many times on this podcast. Hutch, are you any concern about Mason Molina? Like, or is this just kind of the Mason Molina experience? You think where he's he's probably one of the better Saturday game 2 pitchers in America, but every once in a while he's going to throw 5 or 6 walks and not really get out of five
Having
innings for
watched
you.
him in the fall multiple times, having watched him in the preseason, I knew this was very much possible. You kind of held out hope that maybe he would figure it out when the lights were on. He would go throw strikes, but Dave Van Horn has described him all year as effectively wild. And that's a very delicate balancing act because to be effectively wild, you have to throw some strikes. And he just had a hard time throwing it over the plate the other day. And I don't know if that's just an off day or what. But that, especially against a team like South Carolina that strikes out a lot, but they also walk a lot. That's the thing. South Carolina leads the country in
Yeah.
walks. So maybe it was just a bad matchup for Molina. I'm anxious to see kind of how it goes against Florida and everything. But he's got really, really good stuff. He's really hard to hit. But if you keep walking dudes, and you don't need to get very many hits, just like Arkansas's offense, kind of like you don't need Arkansas to string together a bunch of hits if they can walk. Get a couple of walks and then hit it over the fence. You got a 3-run bomb. So that's kind of what you got to worry about with Mason Molina is that wildness.
Yeah, you could kind of tell from the South Carolina approach this weekend, they really wanted to be very, very patient. I mean, I think Hagen's done a pretty good job with command this year, but he still had 5 walks on Friday night, which that's gonna happen. I'll take 5 walks with 6 innings and just one earned run. So I think we can move off of baseball for now and dive into a little bit of transfer portal talk. Let's start with the football team because the basketball they had a lot more movement than the basketball team this weekend. The departees, the guys leaving the program. We had Max Fletcher, the punter, and probably a very big surprise to everybody. Just did not really see that one coming. And then we also had Paris Patterson, the offensive lineman, the backup offensive lineman. Am I missing anybody else that
That's
left
everybody.
Hutch this past week? I don't think so. Okay. Real quick, before we get to the guys the commits, any immediate takeaways off those two? I imagine, Max Fletcher feels like the bigger loss. The
Yeah,
punter
no
feels
doubt. I
like the
mean,
bigger
Paris
loss than the
Patterson was a
offensive lineman.
4-star recruit by some services, but he was buried. I think he ran with the third team most spring, and I think even got surpassed because he's an interior lineman. I think Kobe Branham, the true freshman, had been running with the second team more than him. So not surprising at all with him deciding to move on. But Max Fletcher, yes, very, very surprising. I actually wrote that he was the most surprising post-spring transfer for Arkansas in 3 years, dating back to after the 2021 spring game when Mike Woods, the wide receiver, decided to leave and transfer to Oklahoma under shady circumstances. But that's another conversation for another day. But yeah, it's a big loss. I know I'm going to rant a little bit. I kind of nerd out on the punters sometimes, but Max Fletcher was vastly underappreciated last year. He was, I think, 6th or 7th in the country in terms of punt average, which obviously, if you know anything about football, that's not everything. But he also was top 10 nationally in hang time, according to Pro Football Focus. He was, I think, the number 6 overall punter in the country in terms of Pro Football Focus grade. He was a second team All SEC selection. This guy was really freaking good last year. Sometimes too good because there was every once in a while he would out punt his coverage. But I also don't think that's his problem. I think Arkansas needed to have better gunners and things like that. But that dude can really punt it. Now people remember his freshman year when he struggled. He was very inconsistent. But I think he only had like 1 or 2 really bad shank punts this past year out of close to 60. I think he had the second best single season punting average in school history last year. So the guy was really good. I saw way too many comments about this guy stunk. Who cares? He got beat out by Devin Bale, which I will say Devin Bale was pushing him, but it wasn't because Max Fletcher stinks. It was more because Devin Bale, to me at least, looked much improved this past year. So that's my little punter rant. Max Fletcher, I hope he does well. He's already landed at Cincinnati. He's going to go play with his brother, which was a little bit weird because you only really need one good punter. So that's an odd decision, I guess. Maybe he is a long way from home. He's from Australia. Probably went a long time without seeing any family. Maybe he just wants to go somewhere where he can be with his brother, which you got to respect that. So, but yeah, it is a big surprising loss for Arkansas. But now I guess we'll see what Devin Bell's made of.
Yeah, I'll go. Devin Bale was pushing Max Fletcher. Devin Bale was not beating out Max Fletcher for the job at the end of the day. When you look at the spring game, and I know we kept some unofficial stats, and like Devin Bale's stats were better, but like a couple of those were some bad. The returners not coming up and catching it, and it taking an extra bounce. Like I feel like when you watch those two punt, Fletcher is the prototypical the guy you see on Sundays with the high booming punt that allows the gunners to get down there. Sometimes he punts it too far, but uh, I, honestly, I think they probably need to go to the transfer portal and get another punter because you don't. I don't think Devin Bale is a good enough punter where you don't want any competition there. And sure, he could maybe make me eat my words by middle of the fall and be one of the better punters in the conference. But from what I've seen, I think he is serviceable. But I think you got to go and find some competition there at the punter spot. And as far as Paris Patterson goes, yeah, I think their coaches are super high on Kobe Branham. I think there's a chance he might be the first by the middle of the season, he could be the top backup on the interior, like sliding into either guard spot. I don't, he's not ready to play tackle. He might never play tackle, and we haven't really seen him take any reps at center. But if either of those first two guards go down, I wouldn't be surprised if the freshman is maybe one of the guys that's called upon to slide in there because I think that is something. A position of
Yeah,
need is
absolutely. That
still
that would
along
be
the
one of the
interior offensive
honestly
line.
both sides of the line. The interior would be the kind of the needs that they should go target especially since the first two guys that we're getting ready to talk about that they've landed post spring are a running back and a linebacker. I think that pretty much solidifies those spots. Really, the running back's kind of like icing on the cake, but they definitely needed a linebacker. Now they got to go get probably multiple interior offensive linemen on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that they went out and got a running back, and we can now dive into the additions. But first off, Rodney Hill from Florida State was the running back transfer in here, and what do you make of that, Hutch? I mean, it seems to me like their pecking order is kind of established. Jaquindon Jackson and R Dub are the clear one and two, and then you've got Damo as the security blanket and freshman Braylon Russell as the exciting piece. I don't really know where Rodney Hill will fit in here with this running back. What do you think of his
It is a little bit
arrival at
interesting, but
Arkansas
I'm
and
also
how he
not
maybe could
too
have an
terribly
impact this year?
surprised. I think they like having 5 running backs on scholarship, and this guy isn't the most exciting. This is not Jaquindon Jackson coming in from Utah where he was putting up huge numbers. He played some at Florida State. He actually, everyone calls him a Florida State transfer. He was briefly at Florida A&M. Okay, we can't just gloss over that. He went to Florida A&M from Florida State. Now he left because the head coach that he went to play there, whose name escapes me, but he's a big name coach. It's like a big time recruiter. So I mean, it was a big get for Florida A&M. But he left to become, I believe, the running backs coach at Duke. And so this guy was like, okay, well, I don't want to come to Florida A&M anymore because his coach is gone. And I know Arkansas was on him the first time around. And, maybe he's thinking, hey, even if I'm not the number one guy, I can go play in the SEC, have all the luxuries of the SEC. And he's still pretty young. I think he was only at Florida State for 2 years and he redshirted one of those. So I believe that means he's got 3 years of eligibility left. That he sets up nicely where in the future, he could be the one of the top couple of guys and still get a lot of work. So it made sense to me that they would go get one. It is a little bit interesting that it was the first guy they got post spring.
Yeah, and I've seen as a University of Miami football fan, growing up and paying attention to them last year, I've seen a lot of, Rodney Hill just like paying attention to Florida State and I don't think like he's a good running back. Like I think he could be a backup running back in the SEC, like a clear-cut number 2 guy. I just don't think that position right now is open for Arkansas. I mean, maybe he comes in and surprises and is better than we think and he asserts himself, but I don't do I think Rodney Hill's better than Isaiah Augustave? I don't know. I really don't. I probably would give Augustave the higher ceiling, but in today's, college football and NIL and roster management and stuff, you don't always keep around the guy with the higher ceiling. Sometimes you keep around the better fit. And maybe this is just a guy that knows he's going to come in and not be one of the top 2 guys, or maybe he's expecting to come in and challenge and he surprises us all. I guess from that perspective, the move would make sense. And it's, there were some running back injuries last year, right? We eventually reached the point where Augustave was getting significant snaps as a true freshman. And I don't think we anticipated that before the season. So not a bad idea to add some depth. Of course, Arkansas also had a commit on the other side of the ball. You mentioned the linebacker Larry Worth out of Jacksonville State. This was a huge need for Arkansas, I think, in the spring transfer portal, the linebacker position. They got some depth there. I don't think this is going, again, another guy that's probably not going to be a starter. I think Arkansas likes their starters with Sorey and Spence, but they need some added competition and backup. And he was very productive last year at Jacksonville State. I think around 69 tackles, had an interception. If he can be a productive second string, depth piece for Arkansas, it's a good pickup. Do you have any lasting impressions based off what you've seen or
it's
heard
a depth
about?
Piece. I think that's what's important for everyone to remember. A lot of these guys that they're going to bring in this cycle or whatever at this point of the year, these are depth pieces. They're not going to be sexy, Jaquindon Jackson, Carmona, guys that are going to be, starters and playing very critical positions. These are guys that are going to be depth pieces. I think they like what they have in Brad Spence, obviously Xavier Sorey, and the other young, Alex Sanford, Carson Dean. I think they like those guys. But to get an older guy like Worth is a big deal. It is a little bit interesting. Arkansas he's going to be, I believe, the 4th guy on the team, the 4th scholarship guy on the team that began their career at the FCS level or below, because he got to Jacksonville State when they were still in the FCS. They just were transitioned up into the FBS last year. So it is good to see that he did have a productive year at the FBS level. But he was still, I think it's important to remember, a role player at Jacksonville State. But I think that's because he has a really good skill set. So I'm anxious to see kind of how they use him. I think he's kind of a pass rushing type linebacker, based on what I've read. Because I saw where I think Jacksonville State's head coach is Rich Rodriguez now, maybe. I think I read where he said like they were going to do some really unique and cool things with him, like their plans were. And then of course he goes and enters the portal, and now he's at Arkansas. So he must have some sort of skill set that they like. And I'm anxious to see kind of what that looks like in the fall.
Yeah, he had 3 sacks, 3 quarterback hurries, and a forced fumble in addition to 63 tackles. I gave him 6 extra tackles when I first tried to read off his stat line. I think it's interesting kind of seeing them try and become a little bit more versatile of a defense, and then seeing them bring this guy in, Larry Worth. Just like you said, I think last year we saw them play a lot of almost exclusively 2 linebacker defenses, and it was good. It worked a lot at first, but I think at the end of the year teams could kind of realize they could run the football on Arkansas, and once that started happening, the entire defense kind of fell apart. I think they've got to be a little bit more physical and stronger against the run, and if this guy can be, you mentioned pass rusher, but if he can be kind of one of those outside linebackers that is able to simultaneously rush the passer and, come in and set the edge and defend the run, it could be a good pickup. And maybe we see a little bit more 3 linebacker sets this year, just based off they have some added depth there now with this guy. And, Sam has spoken highly of the 3 sophomores. He really likes the way they've improved. I think Brad Spence is clearly the top guy out of that group, though. And then there's a significant drop off. And if this guy can maybe merge those two spots and make that drop off a little bit smaller. It's a good piece. So we're about a week into the transfer portal now, Hutch. What's the biggest need? I mean, it's obvious, right? It's offensive line and defensive line, but do you think one of those spots is an even bigger need than the other for Arkansas to
Defensive tackle. To me,
diverge
it's
its
easy.
NIL in a
They
certain
have to
direction?
get. They really need to get a high level defensive tackle. Really, I mean, they do have Cam Ball. I think Cam Ball is going to have a breakout year. I think he's going to be really good. Then who knows who starts next to him? Probably Eric Gregory. He's been here forever. You got Kiwi Rose. They're really high on Ian Jaffrard, but he's still going to be a redshirt freshman, and he's just a large human. So maybe he probably can't count on him for a ton of snaps, I would imagine. So they need a guy that can. I think it'd be great if they could find somebody capable of coming in and starting alongside Cam Ball, because to me that would make that defensive line very good. I mean, it's still not Alabama or Georgia level, but it would be a very good defensive line in the SEC. So to me, that's the number one need. I mean, because it would be nice to add some interior offensive linemen, but I think that starting five is pretty much set. We're talking more of like for depth in case there's an injury. They're an injury away from things getting kind of scary. I mean, you mentioned Kobe Branham potentially being that top interior offensive lineman. So that's why it's defensive tackles for me, followed by interior offensive line closely behind.
And I think you kind of saw some of the problems that they might have recruiting interior or recruiting offensive linemen in general. With Branson Hickman, the SMU transfer, who was, I think he came for a visit to Arkansas, it was reported, and Arkansas was heavily in the mix there along with Oklahoma, and he ended up going to Oklahoma just because I think that there's like Oklahoma's offensive line doesn't have five projected starters right now, and that's going to be a difficulty when trying to recruit linemen here is, well, I don't really think any starting spots are open. Like you have to come in and realize that you're either in a heavy competition battle or you're going to be the sixth guy. And we'll see. There's plenty of guys out there that are capable of filling that role, but it might take a while before the starters and the big offensive linemen in the portal have to kind of find their home first, maybe before Arkansas gets its depth pieces along that side. I agree. Defensive tackle is a bigger need. I don't. Everybody needs a defensive tackle at this point in the spring. Those guys don't grow on trees. It's probably one of the most valuable positions in all of college football. Arkansas will be competing with a lot of schools for defensive tackles right now. So we'll see if this is why those coaches get paid so much. It's time to go recruit and find a way to add one guy at least on that side of the ball. Um, I think one thing that I have been pleasantly surprised, not pleasantly surprised, but I think has been a good sign so far through the transfer portal is we haven't gotten a wave of starters leaving. So far we haven't gotten those any like huge significant losses other than Max Fletcher through the portal, and I think that's a good sign of what Coach Pittman must be at least selling to his team and the way that the guys on the team at least think about their chances this year, not only for
Yeah, I think
individual
that's a really
success,
good
but at least for
sign.
a team bounce back at
Pittman
Arkansas.
has said like if we can just keep our team, they feel good about it. They just need to add depth, and for the most part, they've been able to do that. I mean, I think in addition to Patterson and Fletcher, I mean they lost Jacoby Criswell, which I think we all saw as a very strong likelihood of happening, and then Augustov. He was down the pecking order. I think we liked what we saw from him last year, but down in the pecking order. So if you're going to lose guys, those are the kind of guys you want to lose. And then you got to hope that you can find some decent replacements through the transfer portal for depth purposes.
For sure. And I think we have to give credit to Sam in terms of his evaluation in the fall transfer portal. Now, as we leave the spring, um, are all of them going to be hits? No, but I think you look right away. Jaquindon Jackson, Fernando Carmona, Addison Nichols, and Danico Slaughter are four hits. I think it remains to be seen on some of the other guys. Keyshawn Blackstock's a starter. I think which is a kind of a hit, but I'd want to see him perform against the SEC. But I think those four guys, and then there's potential for Miguel Mitchell and some of the other secondary guys. Maybe they work their way up, but so far I think they've done pretty good work in acquiring talent through the transfer portal, given the circumstances too. Because Arkansas coming off a 4-8 year, it's a little harder to recruit when that way. So they had to, like you said, raid the Mountain West, and it seems
Yeah,
like
absolutely. I
they've
mean,
done an
that's
okay
not
job
even
in
mentioning
the
Taylon
talent that
Green
they've
at
got in
quarterback,
Fayetteville.
and Xavier Story, linebacker, and see they've definitely hit some.
Yeah.
We'll see how big of a hit they are. At least in terms of their current roster, they've been better than what they had, so that's at least an encouraging sign. But yeah, very so far so good with a lot of those hits. I'm still, I guess one other position we need to mention is maybe wide receiver. The one guy they brought in was Jordan Anthony. He looked better at the end of spring, but still is not a guy I would count on, being a major contributor. But I think it would be good for them to bring in, another guy that they would feel comfortable playing. But it's going to be hard because you pretty much know your starters are Tyrone Broden, Andrew Armstrong, Isaiah Satania at that point. It's going to be hard to crack that rotation, but wide receiver is a spot where they do rotate some. So maybe you're able to get a guy that's a quality guy that's able to take a bet on themselves and come in and compete.
Yeah, I mean, I was beating the drum last year that I didn't think the wide receivers were good enough. So I guess I agree, but like you said, it's going to be hard. I don't envision them getting a plug and play wide receiver, even as maybe a top backup. I just think that there's too many roles already defined with this group, and they're really, if they, they're really excited about Tyrone Broden. So I think if he can take that next step, it elevates everybody in the wide receiver room, and a healthy Luke Has will help as well. So real quick, the basketball team. I think we kind of guessed we would have a slew of new guys to talk about this week, but only one for now. Might pronounce this name wrong for the rest of the year, but Zvonimir, I think, Ivsic from Kentucky, 7'2" Croatian, following John Calipari to Arkansas. Uh, I don't have too much to say. I just think it's a great pickup. Anytime you can bring a top recruit who's coming back for his sophomore year, great skill set, great size. I think it's a good starting place for Calipari's roster, and I expect next week
Honestly,
we'll
there could be
have
more than
more
one
than
guy
one
by the
guy to
time
talk
people
about
are
on the
listening to
roster.
this, because I know Carter Knox, I believe, is on his visit at Arkansas as we speak. So I
Yeah.
think most people feel pretty good about that. But to get the Croatian to as your first guy, I think that's really solid. I remember during the season whenever he got eligible, because there was all sorts of eligibility issues, and it wasn't until like mid-January when he got eligible, and he like goes out and has this great game against Georgia, and I'm like, oh, of course Kentucky's just got this guy waiting to become eligible, and that's their guy. Whereas Arkansas's got Keon Minifield as its guy, and no, I mean he ended up not being like superstar, but pretty good for a freshman, to come in and play like that. And I think John Calipari's even said like he's excited to have him get a full off season and a full like non-conference slate and everything. I think that'll be really fun to watch. Him alongside whoever else is here for next season.
Yeah. One note of departures, Tremont Mark, just, he had such a good time playing against Texas schools last year. He wanted to join one this year. He single-handedly ruined Texas A&M season, and he's now going to play for the Texas Longhorns, and will likely face Arkansas next year in the SEC. So we'll get a Tremont Mark revenge game against the Hogs. Going to be a fun basketball season. It feels like it shouldn't be about 8 months away, but that's how the calendar works, I guess. So awesome, Hutch. Well, I guess that's it from my vantage point. I think any other basketball news real quick you want to touch on
Yeah, I
before
think
we
that
go?
about
But I
covers
think
it. I will
we're
say,
we're gonna have a
something I've
lot more to talk
noticed.
about in the
It's a
coming
very
weeks.
drastic difference, covering Eric Musselman versus covering John Calipari when it comes to the transfer portal. He keeps things close to the vest. I think they don't contact nearly as many, whereas Musk contacts anyone with a pulse. So it's been a little bit of an adjustment period. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, and it's crazy seeing him Musselman fill out his roster right now over at USC. I think he's got like 2 Ivy Leaguers or something like that. Uh, hey, it's going to be fun to kind of follow Musselman's career, I think, and just where it goes from here because there's a lot of different ways. I mean, he could go and absolutely crush it at USC, or he could get there and realize what everybody's kind of been saying for the past couple months is Arkansas is a much better job than USC. What are you doing leaving this place? But alas, that's no longer of Arkansas's main concern. It is all on the Coach Calipari bandwagon right now. So thank you everybody so much for listening. We'll wrap it up here. We'll have another episode coming to you next weekend, next Monday, following the Arkansas home baseball series against Florida. And we'll have plenty more transfer portal talk, I bet, to discuss on both the basketball and football front. So, Hutch, thanks for joining me. I will see you in a little bit this week. And listeners, thank you so much, as always, for listening to Hoggin the Mic. We'll talk to you next week.